This is Mandatory Listening. I'm your host, Kent Mann. Each week, we sit down over a cup of coffee and discuss interesting topics in the world of the customer experience.
And we're back. Mandatory Listening.
Yeah. That's right out of Jimmy Fallon era.
Well, Jimmy Fallon, I had to give you a little shout out there. And we're back.
If you don't know the reference, look it up because
Yeah.
it's hilarious.
Well, this is Mandatory Listening. This is not Saturday Night Live. And Dan Mann's with us again today.
Good to be back.
We're doing our third part of the Gentle Pressure Relentlessly Applied series. I think we're on training and coaching.
That's correct.
But I wanted to talk to you first about
Saturday Night Live?
Saturday Night Live. Yeah.
Jimmy Fallon?
The potentially an adverse reaction, because obviously you like to cook and host and have people around and have them experience your good cooking. But I wanted to ask if anyone has ever had an adverse reaction, something that someone didn't like, or just a bad experience when you cooked for people. No one had an allergic reaction. Or
No,
anything.
I have not created any of those kinds of knock on wood problems, but you've had a few. I know you love tomatoes.
Oh yeah.
That's not the case
It's
for a
sarcasm.
listener. There's sarcasm. Ken hates a tomato. And the first time I put a homemade spaghetti sauce in front of you that had a little extra tomato chunk, more than you liked.
Well, that made me realize that spaghetti is made with tomatoes.
Yeah. You spent an evening at the table by yourself while the rest of us ate and cleaned up and cooked and went to watch other things. So while you had to sit there and finish your plate.
Yeah.
That was an adversary. You almost died with that one, Kent.
Well, I was just more trying to come up with a strategy of how I could move the spaghetti around enough to where it looked like I'd eaten enough that I could go inside.
Yeah.
This was last week. I was, No,
So-
how old was I? Was I
You were third grade.
third grade?
Yeah, so 17.
Yes.
So an example of a meal that I cooked that didn't go well and people didn't like, yes, immediately comes to mind. It was your brother Hank and his maybe junior year of college, Appalachian State, and he's headed home for the weekend, and he's bringing, I think his roommate maybe was coming with him, so him and maybe one or two other people. So I like to cook a southern dish called chicken and dumplings. So it's just really a stew with chicken and dough. And I was making
It's
homemade
like biscuit dough, right?
It's like biscuit dough, yeah. So, but I was making homemade dumplings this time, and the meal was kind of cooking up and doing well. And Hank called me to let me know that he was bringing more than his roommate and a friend. There were going to be 8 people in total. So I should have right then I should have turned left and gone a different direction. But instead, in my wisdom, I decided I'll make it. This is a perfect dish to expand. I'll just keep adding more dumplings, and the dumplings will fill them up. And these college kids will absolutely love chicken and dumplings. So I continued to make homemade dumplings to go into the big pot of chicken and dumplings. It did not go well. As the dough settled to the bottom of the pan, and either through not paying attention or not stirring frequently enough or just being in a rush, all that dough sat at the bottom and burned. Now, if you can picture what's supposed to be a nice soup, sort of brothy, chicken and dumpling experience, but picture it with an inch of burned raw flour at the bottom.
Yeah. So kind of an earthy,
Musky,
Yeah.
smoky.
I think you could probably play that off at App State. I mean, they're not.
They wouldn't know.
Yeah, they wouldn't know.
No, they knew, and I had to order pizza. So, in fact, not only did I throw out the soup, I actually threw out the pan as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. You ruined, I think, any experience for a.
I don't think I've made them
nice Southern
since.
meal. Yeah,
That's been
no.
a few years ago.
Yeah, I haven't had chicken and dumplings in a while.
Yeah, so it was a bad dream at the time, but now it just is a pleasant, fun memory.
Okay.
Thanks
well,
for bringing it up.
Yeah, no problem. So let's talk about training and coaching. How do we not burn flour at the bottom of a pan?
Well, to set some context, this is the third element of gentle pressure relentlessly applied. So our overall effort here is, if you are managing a team, how do you get results through people? How do you lead change? How do you maintain excellence? And how do you create what you want in terms of working through a team? So gentle pressure relentlessly applied is our overall concept, and there have been 2 previous conversations. The first one is agreement on approach. The second one, metrics for assurance. So if you've got the staff to agree on the approach and that this is a good idea and I want to do it this way, Then you create some degree of metrics that would be to measure and track the progress. That brings us to the very important training and coaching, which we call skills.
So this is after. So the metrics under the little bullet under metrics is transparency. So where both the person setting the metrics and the person who's accountable to the metrics knows for sure, okay, this expectation has not been met. Now, is that a logical step then? The expectation has not been met. Now we must train and coach?
Yeah, we start with where are we now?
Okay.
So in other words, if this were training for running, what's your current time in the 800? I'm currently running 1 minute and 58 seconds. Okay, so we're going to do some training and coaching to change that 158 down to 156, 155, and going forward.
Yeah.
So the training and coaching is a development of skills to actually be able to accomplish the goal, hit the metrics, and achieve the effort that we want to achieve. So this is deliberately called training and coaching because they are two sides of the same kind of coin. Ultimately, we're wanting to develop skills. So if we're asking people to do something, I don't know that I can give an example, but I'll come up with a quick, really simple example, and that is, how do you properly greet a customer when they walk in your door? So, if you take the first step, which is let's agree on how we're going to do it. Okay, we agree. How are we going to measure that? How are we going to be able to track that with some degree of metrics? In this case, I'm going to say it's probably conversion rate. And then we're going to do some training and coaching. So training is the first step. Training is developing a skill when the game is not being played. So if you are lifting weights, but you're in a competition, well, lifting weights is the hours and hours you put in the gym of developing muscles, learning the technique, getting the correct form, and ultimately building the result in your physical, in your muscles. If the training is, if you're a chef and you're in your kitchen, you're learning, you're being taught, and you are training on the proper way to cook an egg, the proper way to create a souffle, the proper way to cook this dessert. You are trained on it. You learn the ins and outs of it. You practice, you rehearse, but you're not offering that meal to a guest. You're just practicing, and it gets evaluated and judged because the game is not being played. We are training. Separately from that, coaching. And coaching is what happens in the game. It's the coach on the sidelines of a basketball game calling a timeout and saying, Shaquille, you got to get into the middle lane there. You got to block this guy out, and you got to hit your free throws. I noticed that you've changed your form of shooting your free throws. You're dribbling the ball twice, and in practice, we dribble the ball 3 times, and you need to go back to doing what we did in practice. Oh, that's right, Coach. I forgot that. The 3 dribble. That's right. That's going to make a difference. So coaching happens in the game. And so what oftentimes happens is that I see that companies and teams who are trying to develop skills, they do training without step 1 and step 2 in place. In other words, they don't have agreement on approach, and they don't have metrics for assurance. That's the big thing we face as the Man Group. Companies bring us in to train their staff.
Right.
But the staff has no metrics to measure the performance, and the staff has never agreed to the approach.
And so I think it's an important distinction between everyone who's being, like, the people being trained also need to agree, not just the person who's paying for the training or buying the material or whatever it is. There has to be, oh, well, I'm the boss, so that means they all agree because I write their check.
Well, we actually came to this conclusion for gentle pressure relentlessly applied because of the many times we've been paid for and brought in for training only to sit in front of a group of people who don't want to be trained.
Right. And then it becomes a 2 or 3 day passive aggressive lean back, arms crossed. I'm not gonna play your game.
Well, a day has passed, 2 days have passed, a month has passed, and nothing has been implemented.
Yeah.
But I spent all this money on this training
and time to potentially close the store and organize the logistics of a multi-store location. Yeah.
And so the end result of that is training or an exercise in learning, a PowerPoint, a workshop delivered to people who don't agree with the approach and have no metrics to assure that it's happening is a waste of time.
Yeah.
So for us, training and coaching, which is we're a training organization. That's what the Man Group does. But we understand it's only one small part of an overall effort to change behavior and get results. It is a very important part. And that it oftentimes happens, as we spoke recently with Matt Powell, and he talked about how as the retail world has decreased in compensation, paying people less and less, and yet expecting a higher result, this is an impossible measure, both for the store, for the customer, most of all for the employee.
Yeah, and the customer, like, not only is the employer expecting more while directly paying them less, just out of whether it be a minimum wage law or whatever the necessity may be, the customer is also expecting more because they have so many options. And we've talked about this plenty, where the modern day customer has a million different options on how they want to buy their bike component or their running shoes or you name it. Like, they have brands, they have different channels for which they can buy, and they have the option of any different type of convenience. Do I want the convenience of trying it on? Okay, cool. Do I want the convenience of having it tomorrow? Cool, I have that too.
So you've got an employee, let's say you're selling a specialty hiking boot or a running shoe, and I'm supposed to diagnose what type of shoe is right for you, what sort of foot pain you've been having, or what your performance issue is that you're attempting to address with the shoe. I'm supposed to diagnose that by some understanding of biomechanics, offer a product that solves it, and then help figure out whether that's the right size, whether it's actually going to do what it said, because I'm well-versed in the product and I'm well-versed in how a foot performs. But I've not been trained, or it's my third day, or the manager just didn't have time to work with me on it, so he put me in front of a video. I watched the video, but I still don't actually measurably know how to do this.
But I took a quiz on it.
I took a quiz, so I should know. So now I've got an untrained, uninterested employee with a situation that they can't win. Let's actually transfer this over to restaurants. So now I've got health code requirements that have to do with the temperature, that have to do with proper food handling, that have to do with proper cleanliness in the kitchen. But I've not been taught any of those things. And I'm just here now cooking, but not following health code or restaurant guidelines. Now I'm actually putting someone at risk.
Yeah.
I'm putting someone at danger. If you transfer that sort of thinking into retail, where performance or someone's actual safety and security are at risk, I must be trained.
Yeah.
I must be prepared.
Yeah.
So this is an obstacle, because a lot of retail owners and managers are hearing this and saying, well, why should I train them? They're only going to be here 90 days anyway. Why do I invest this money in them and they're gone in 6 weeks? And so it's a waste of my time and a waste of my money. Well, if that's what you're thinking, I want to start by saying, first of all, do everything you can. Do not retain those people for only 90 days.
Yeah.
You need to retain people, keep them so they become matured and developed and practiced and learned. But secondly, how dare you put that person in front of 90 days worth of customers and give them a subpar experience, or an inexact experience, an experience in which they're not prepared, not skilled, and actually risking your customer experience.
Yeah, and then have the expectation that, oh my gosh, this person is not doing what I asked them to do. I'm paying you this. I'm paying your paycheck. Why don't you just listen? And the mentality around we've talked about this in a previous podcast, but the mentality around the video training approach, and then check. I remember, in my experience, where it was a check trained. Like after a certain amount of time, after 2 weeks on the job or 3 weeks on the job or whatever, you have next to your employee name, they've been trained. And I think that mentality is just pervasive and certainly negative for not only the customer, but also your bottom line.
Yeah, I'll take you back to my days when I was directly supervising a retail operation. That was Backrack Men's Clothing. So we sold suits and ties and everything that went along with that. And the business at the time was a straight commission business, 8% commission. And so if you were going to make a living, you needed to sell the high-priced suits. Mm-hmm. Suits were starting at $335, $375, and all the way up to $1,500. So you wanted to sell those suits because that's where the money was. That's where you made a good living. But in your first 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks as an employee, you could not sell suits in that store unless you were able to successfully sell a suit to the manager in a role play situation.
Really?
So we trained them on the proper fit, how to understand the way a jacket is supposed to fit the shoulders, the chest, the waist. How do you properly alter and mark up a suit for alteration? And how did you understand all the elements of measuring a customer and identifying size? You had to be able to do those things and demonstrate it in an actual simulated sale in order to qualify. And so people would try to pass the test of conducting a sale for the manager, and guess who the judge was? The manager. The manager's job was to train. The manager's job was to then evaluate, and then if you got signed off on, you were able to successfully demonstrate the skills. If you could show us the skills, you got into the suit room, and that's where you could make a living.
Wow.
So I think it's important that we understand that training is a lifetime of work. For those that are achievement oriented, we're reading, we're watching videos, we're listening to podcasts, we're developing ourselves. And so the successful retail operation or service operation is going to continue ongoing training. But more than that, there has to be an in-game coaching experience, not E-N-D, end game, I-N, in-game coaching that's happening, where the manager, the sales floor manager, the floor manager, the supervisor is actually providing some coaching as things are happening, when there's actual customers nearby.
Pressure.
When it's going on. That's where we're paying attention. We're watching the game that's happening. We're watching the experience that's happening. We're watching the customers on our floor, and we're providing reminders, and we're providing coaching tips. We're pulling people aside when there's no one on the sales floor, and we're providing a reminder, giving some feedback. This is oftentimes missed, because a sales floor manager, a store manager, a customer experience manager must be observing what's happening, and during the game or as the business is open, providing that feedback. And this is the hard work, really, of supervision, is watching what's happening as it's happening and providing some feedback while it's going on.
Where's the opportunity here? When I'm thinking of the people that we work with, where let's say it's not just a clock in, clock out physical location and they have to deal with customer facing sales floor people. Let's talk about someone who maybe has a team of sales reps, or they have a team of remote workers, or they have a team of, content development or something like that. How does and let's say you're an owner, or you're a person who's faced away from the manager. So they have a person who's paying for either the training and development to the manager, who's then the manager is accountable to the result, the end result. They're owning a team of salespeople. Who is training the manager?
Well,
whose job is that to train and coach and develop the manager's skills? If you're just an owner and you're crossed your arms getting pissed off about you're not getting the result two channels down the line, where like the sales floor, how do you take the first step? Is it your job to train and coach your manager?
Well, I know you didn't intend to create a sale, a pitch opportunity in this podcast, but the Man Group does this work, and that's why we started Man University, because no one is training a manager how to manage and lead and coach a team. So by and large, people that want to be leaders and people who want to be the manager and coach, they find a way to develop that skill. That's why I wrote the book Orbit. It's what people end up doing when they want to be a good coach. I don't know how Bill Belichick became a great coach. He probably studied it, looked at it. Someone may have mentored him. I think you would look back and see he was influenced by a number of people. But he took it upon himself to be a great coach. He wanted to be successful with a team. And so he really focused on, instead of him doing the football playing or the throwing, he made it an expert. He made himself an expert as the one who could coach and lead and develop the skill in others. So I think it starts with a desire to do it. It starts with the intent to do it. I want to be effective through others. I want to lead others to their success, thereby achieving success for myself and my company.
I don't want to leave that just yet, because I think that's a really good point. You have to make a conscious decision of, this is what I want to do. Because there are a lot of managers out there, and even just not only managers, GMs, like really high-level people who are in the inner circle of potentially a corporate environment where there's a lot on the line, and all this person wants to do is be the top salesperson. They don't want to manage people. They don't want to manage someone else's results. They just want to say, I could do it better myself. that person's probably not a good manager
No, they're not. And I
because
think
they don't want to be.
the world of sports is filled with examples of people that were fabulous on the court.
Yeah.
Isaiah Thomas comes to mind. Even Michael Jordan comes to mind. People that were just brilliant on the floor, playing the game, in charge. Put them on the sidelines and have them be responsible for the leadership and the development of skills in others, and it just wasn't their skill set.
Yeah, they can't do it.
Yeah, as opposed to a Steve Carr. If anybody follows basketball here, hopefully you're keeping up with these examples. But Steve Carr, another member of that great Bulls team, great player, also made it a point to become a great coach, and is. And so it's a big difference, and many have done it and many have not.
Yeah.
So the bottom line is, the great salespeople of the world, the great customer service providers of the world, good for you. I mean, that's important, and we're thrilled that that's happening. For others of us, the power and the impact is in leading that effort.
Yeah.
And coaching that effort and teaching that effort. So it starts with the desire to do it, and then the resources to develop that skill are plenty.
So how much of this training piece outside of coaching is just objective material that a new hire has to go through? Like they just obviously have to learn the logistics of how to run the POS system, how to add in a new customer, how do you make a sales call, how do you travel to one of your locations. How much of this is just objective material?
Well, there's a variety of things that have to be coached and trained.
Yeah.
So let's break it down. And depending on the business you're in, if you're a restaurant, you've got to learn where is everything in the store, in the kitchen. Excuse me.
Yeah.
If I'm a server, what's the time frame for plating the meal? How do you want that to look? What's the strategy for how it looks?
What's the company's vision on how often you go around a table to check water, to put someone's napkin in their lap for them? Do you provide a menu for them?
So I'd call all that the technical skills of the job. If
Right.
you're in sales, how do you make a sale? How do you engage with the customer? Those are technical skills.
How do you put the credit card into the system?
All of that.
Yeah.
So it's the technical skills of the job. And then there has to be the orientation or employment law challenges of the business.
Right.
That have to do with how do you get along with your teammate? What are the employment law rules related to your locker or where you put your things? How do you interact with coworkers?
Yeah.
What's the proper and improper way of dealing with customers? What are loss prevention challenges for an organization such as ours? So those things have to be taught.
Yep.
And then separately, there has to be product knowledge training.
Yep.
So the product knowledge training can be, what does the cherry pie taste like? Tell me about the risotto tonight. Tell me how it's made. By the way, I have a peanut allergy. Are there peanut oils used in cooking this, at all? I'm vegan. Is this a vegan dish?
Yep.
Those are product knowledge issues. Or tell me about this shoe. Tell me that the shoe that I'm buying, is this going to help me with my pronation?
Yeah.
Et cetera. So there's product knowledge issues. There's just employment law training that takes place. And then there has to be the technical skills of the job.
And then I would transition from that piece over to the coaching, which is almost like refining. It's like turning the shaved marble into like an actual piece of you're really shaping the culture of your sales floor potentially, or your sales experience, because the manager has to see a mistake or see something that they don't agree with or they don't align with the company vision, and they have to immediately address it. And if they don't, then their company culture is at stake.
Well, that's
Okay, so I think, do you notice how you said that instead of this? Why don't we try it another way? Or
perfect example is in the fast food world. You've got a McDonald's experience and you've got a Chick-fil-A experience. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I've read the stats accurately, but the last thing I believe I read was Chick-fil-A is still the favorite fast food restaurant in the country.
I'm sure.
And why is that? They have a very specific culture
Yeah.
at Chick-fil-A. And I like a Chick-fil-A occasionally, but the thing about Chick-fil-A is they have a very specific way of even answering when someone says, thank you.
Yeah.
They don't let you say, no problem.
Yeah.
That's not cultural.
Yep.
It's, you're welcome. Or it's my pleasure.
Yeah.
Whatever their culture is. Oh,
That's my pleasure.
That's a very specific way of creating a customer interaction that's true in one restaurant to another. And
it's funny because it's not even revolutionary. It's like, and certain people will say my pleasure just because that's what it suits in that situation. But because they've said everyone in the company, when someone says thank you, you have to say my pleasure. And it just creates this like a tier above experience because no one else does that. And it's so weird because it's so small.
Well, I write about that in the book, and we talk about the restaurant experience that can be differentiated. And the one example that I mentioned was at NOLA in New Orleans, and the restaurant there. Their strategy is that when the plates are brought out to the table, whether it's a table of 4, 2, 10, however many, that when the meal is brought out, that all of the plates must be sat in front of the customer at exactly the same time. So that's a simple strategy, but table for 4, normally the rest the waiter comes out and goes, "So who had the risotto? Who had the shrimp? Who had the whatever?" And we hand them out one at a time, which means the first person's sitting there while other people figure out where their food is. That's the way it is in almost all restaurants. But at NOLA, what happened was every plate was sat exactly at the same moment.
Yeah.
Which takes an entirely different level of planning, logistics, as well as training to execute that. So what that means is someone decided that's a good customer experience.
Yeah.
Let's create it. Let's train it. Let's practice it, and let's deliver it with every single table.
Every time.
And so I think what we're talking about is not easy.
No.
It's extremely difficult.
Yeah.
But those are the differentiators in experience that are going to make your business memorable, that are going to probably bring that customer back, which puts more pressure on you because next time it better be exactly the same way.
Yeah. Because they're going to say, "Oh my gosh, can you believe that restaurant that we went to?" And then they tell all their friends. Friends go there. If it's not like that, then
the inconsistency,
it's a disappointment.
Exactly. So this is why training and coaching are so important. It is developing that skill.
And the stakes are now higher because think about that poor Chick-fil-A employee who didn't say "my pleasure" and the customer was like, "Gotcha," and then it's like all over whatever, and that employee probably lost their job because of that.
Becomes a social media,
or at least got some training and coaching about it.
Well, I think the difference here, the difference going forward, is the consistency of experience comes down to agreement on the approach, the metrics that track it, and then training and coaching to assure that those skills are there, so the person knows what to do, is capable of doing it, and becomes a highly skilled employee. That's the difference.
Yeah, and then the agreement piece. I think if we're talking about the Chick-fil-A example, once it's agreed upon, there's no letting up because everyone who would apply for a job at Chick-fil-A knows that they're probably going to have to memorize the "my pleasure" phrase, and so it just becomes assumed or expected of the employees or the potential employees and the customers
and the customer.
Yeah, and so I think that creating that, I guess, external culture would also heighten the expectation of applicants, which is a big challenge that we always talk about, is like, how do you find good people? Well, you have to differentiate yourself as a job. And so if you have these things that are just so apparent about your company, it almost attracts people to get in on that.
People want to be part of a winning team.
Yeah.
They want to work for an organization that's seen as successful. They want to be part of something where people go, "Oh, you work there? Wow, that's a hard job to get. Wow, the fact that I love that restaurant, love that company."
Yeah.
It is what it means to be part of something successful, and people want that.
And it's something like I said, it was customer facing. So I'm going to just wear this "my pleasure" thing out just because it's funny. But that for a customer, you go in and you say, every time you say thank you, they say "my pleasure." Think about, at least my mind goes to, well, what else? If they've gotten everyone in their organization nationwide to do this, what else have they gotten them to do? You know that in the back there's a clean standard, and you know that they're training to that cleanliness standard.
Well, I can tell you something else they've done. They've got a system in place where they've got enough people working in that restaurant to meet the restaurant's needs. I go through the Atlanta airport on a regular basis, and any morning I'm going through the Atlanta airport, I'm finding the Chick-fil-A for breakfast because I like their biscuit.
Yeah.
If I walk up and see, and it is always the longest line.
Yeah.
So the Chick-fil-A is always the longest line of all the breakfast options. I have no fear that line moves quickly, and that within 5 or 6 minutes, I'm going to be at the front of the line ordering my food, and another 60 seconds later, I'm going to have my food, because I know that not only do they teach them how to say
my pleasure,
They teach them how to do that job quickly. Well, there's enough people managing. I trust their process. I trust their system. So it makes me a loyal customer from that perspective. So it's good across the board.
Yeah. So that's a good example. I hadn't thought about that one. So thanks for bringing that one up. So is there any takeaways from this that we can just summarize in a few sentences or a paragraph?
The first step to being effective, well, first of all, the first remembering is that training and coaching are two different things.
Yeah.
One happens in skills development before the game is played. Coaching takes place during the game, and that's an important, oftentimes a miss.
So not doing the checklist mistake of assuming that because they've poured through the objective material, taken a little quiz, they are now trained.
Yep. No, we're coaching, we're watching, we're observing, we're continuing that work. So training and coaching are the two sides of this. Next, you're not doing any good if you train people who have not taken step 1 and step 2, which is agreement on approach and metrics for assurance.
Step 3, see step 1.
Exactly. So training and coaching has no purpose without some context and without people understanding. So that's very important.
You have to train people who agree to be trained.
Want to be trained and understand the metrics that are there. So it's all part of the overall approach. And then it's important, if you are the trainer, if you are the manager responsible for this, that the first step is that you want to do it and you want to be good at it.
Yeah.
And being good at it is its own unique skill.
So intent.
That's right.
Yep.
So if we renew our End of the Podcast Club and you're still listening and you're a manager or owner who's interested in being a good trainer, I have a gift for you. So if you will send us an email or respond to this podcast, wherever you listen to it, we'll get the note. I'll be happy to send you a copy of my book, Orbit, The Art and Science of Influence, $22 value plus shipping. I will send it to you absolutely free if you simply request it. And it's a book on training and influencing a team.
Yep. Well, thanks so much, Dan. And we've got one more, so stay tuned for the next podcast on this series. We're going to close it out with, what's the last piece? The last piece is the culture of accountability.
Culture of accountability, which is integrity.
Yep. All right, cool. Well, thanks for listening, guys.
That's it for this episode. If you like what you hear, subscribe and leave a review on our iTunes channel. We'll see you next week.